TIBCO platform and how that can help you to basically bring your integration software to the cloud. All right, with that said, let me also point out that some of these statements I make today might be released the platform last year, November. Some of the things that I might show you today are subject to change. So don't make financial decisions based on everything I show you today. Okay, I have prepared a little agenda. So I first want to talk about the TIBCO platform. Then I want to talk about an essential component of the TIBCO platform, namely the TIBCO Developer Hub. And then in the end, I want to show you a VS Code extension we built for, let's say, our next generation integration platform, Flogo. And with every part of the agenda, I want to do a short demo. Okay, so let's start with the TIBCO platform. So basically, we were trying to listen to our customers after we had created TIBCO Cloud Integration, which is a full-blown SaaS solution of TIBCO. You guys might have worked with it or heard about it. And the TIBCO platform under the covers is really the third generation of that TCI platform. And the things that we are trying to put in the platform is, first of all, a unified experience when it comes to UI for both, let's say, on-prem solutions and solutions that run into the cloud. Create an end-to-end observability so that you can really follow a message, that you can deploy your applications anywhere. So either on-prem or in, let's say, every data center of your cloud provider like AWS or Azure. And that wasn't the case in TCI. And we want to make it open and composable. So provide APIs, CLIs, stuff like the Developer Hub in order for you to create things like templates, and that I will talk about in much more detail later. But really what we try to achieve with the platform, what kind of the vision is that we want to take the best of both worlds. Right? So the one world being the on-prem deployments like BusinessWorks 5 and the classic TIBCO stack, and the new world being, let's say, the SaaS world, where you completely have a software as a service. Now, the advantage of, let's say, the on-prem world is that you're completely in control. You decide where you run stuff, you decide when you upgrade stuff, etc., which is nice, but it can also be cumbersome and costly. And the advantage of a complete SaaS solution is that you upgrades automatically happen for you, but you sometimes don't really decide where stuff runs. So what we're trying with the platform is basically take those two ingredients, so the best of both worlds. So you are completely in control. You decide where stuff runs, but we still want to make, let's say, upgrades as easy as it is with a SaaS solution. So the cost to upgrading is as low as possible. Now, what you're looking at here is at a prime component of the TIBCO platform, namely the control plane. And the control plane basically provides a single pane of glass into all of your TIBCO deployments. And basically what you formerly knew as TIBCO products, so BusinessWorks, Flogo, business events, etc., they are kind of called capabilities, and these capabilities run in data planes. And on top of these data planes, you deploy applications. So for example, integration applications. The vision is that you have a control plane, which is currently TIBCO hosted. And in that control plane, you basically manage 0 or more data planes, right? I would say 1 or more, because why would you manage 0 data planes? But anyway, in these data planes, you then run the actual, let's say, mission critical software. And that runs in a either on-prem or in a data center of your choice. And what I mean with mission critical, I mean the control plane can be switched off and everything will still be running and your business will still continue as it does today. It's not nice if the control plane switches off, but it's not the end of the world, right? And if a data plane switches off, then basically the, let's say the integration stops. Now, currently the control plane, like I said, is TIBCO hosted. What we want to release, and that comes very soon in the future, so let's say halfway during this year, that the control plane can also be hosted on customer side, so that you can host the control plane yourself. The same for the data plane. So the data plane is currently, let's say, customer hosted, but what you will see probably more towards the end of the year or beginning of next year is that you can also have a TIBCO hosted data plane. And that's basically, let's say, a TCI organization. Here you see something of the observability. So you can basically trace messages that go through the system. This is currently enabled for Flogo and BWCE, and you will also see that towards the end of the year working for BW5. And we really want to create that end-to-end observability pattern. Then what we're also trying to add to the platform somewhere in the near future or midway future is the notion of FinOps. So that you basically see, okay, what is the costs of all my infrastructure? And not only, let's say, the cloud infrastructure, but also the license cost, etc., that you can bring that all together. And then on top of that, so on top of the FinOps, we also want to enable something called GreenOps, so that next to your cost, you can also see what is the environmental impact of all those components running. And there are more and more countries where that basically becomes a requirement that companies have to report on this impact. All right, now let's dive a little bit into the platform and let's talk about the data planes. And there are basically, let's say, 2 or 3 types of data planes. The first ones are, let's say, cloud native data planes. In other words, they run on Kubernetes. And the other type of data plane are running on, let's say, the classic stack. So BusinessWorks 5, so either VMware or bare metal machines. What we are trying to achieve is basically putting all the TIBCO products as capabilities into these data planes. So today you will find integration, so Flogo, BusinessWorks 5, BWCE, and soon also BW6 in there. You'll also find messaging, so EMS, and towards the end of the year, FTL. And we'll add API management, event processing with business events, data virtualization, and data management with EBX. So you will slowly see all the TIBCO products basically coming to the TIBCO platform as capabilities. All right, so what are the benefits of using the TIBCO platform? First of all, you have complete visibility in all your running TIBCO components. So for the first time, for example, it's possible to have one single administrator for both BusinessWorks 5 and BWCE deployments. Then you can also accelerate the development by using, let's say, templates from the developer hub. So you just answer a number of questions and you generate new applications, which you can also deploy. And you get much more insight into performance, but also financial aspects of your running solution. So this is if we open up the TIBCO platform. And then here you basically see the architecture, and in that yellow bar you see the control plane, and on the left side, the blue bar, you see a data plane, and here on the right blue you also see a data plane. All right, so these left side data planes are the Kubernetes type data planes. So you have a Kubernetes namespace, and in there you deploy your pods or your deployments of BWCE, Flogo, and you can manage all of that through the control center. Now on the right side, you have, let's say, the classic stack, BusinessWorks 5, BW6, BE, and then with the messaging bus in the middle. Now, the way to enable that is actually very easy. So you have a running BW5 domain. All you need to do is install the so-called control tower. And the control tower is basically a binary or a little executable that you have to put on one of the machines of the domain. So only one, not all of them. And that control tower then will start interacting with Hawk. And through Hawk, it will basically send all the information required to the control center or the control plane. So in the control center, you can then see all the BusinessWorks 5 applications running. You can see the logs, etc. Now, I have to say that today, this is only, let's say, a monitor solution. So it's kind of a read only, right? It only sends the information to display. In the future, this will also allow you to manage your solution. So starting, stopping apps, deploying apps, etc. That's something we're introducing towards the end of the year. Now, on the left side, you basically have your Kubernetes stack. And here you can deploy your applications through the control plane. As soon you can also use an API or a CLI to do that. Now, I also would like to highlight that the developer portal, so the developer hub, basically runs inside of a data plane here. And I'll talk about the developer hub in a little bit more detail later. But that means that it kind of runs in your own data center, basically. So here you have a little video where you see the control plane. So you see in all the different apps running in all the various regions. And I'll actually do a little demo as well. So we actually go into the control plane. Here you see the various capabilities. Here you see a BWC application. You see the logs of that application. And there you can also see the observability, for example. And here we see a Flogo application, I think. And then you can see the details of that Flogo application as well. All right, so what are the main features of the control plane? First of all, you can monitor your apps. So it's really, let's say, an administrator view. You can manage all your TIBCO assets. You get that end-to-end observability. And you can register new data planes or on-prem data planes. So you can bring your own on-prem infra. And you can see in the future what your spend is through the FinOps dashboard. I spoke about this, so you can basically run your apps on any kind of, let's say, runtime. The idea with FinOps is that you can track the usage by product or maybe by project or department. And you can also take these costs and see what you're spending on your hyperscaler, so AWS or Azure. And this is kind of the idea to basically give insight in what the total cost of the TIBCO solution is. And eventually you'll also get cost or how to lower your environmental impact. All right, so the TIBCO Developer Hub, with the, let's say, TIBCO platform, we embrace the, let's say, notion of platform engineering. And in order to explain that a little bit, I have to give a little bit of a history lesson. So let's say 10, 15 years ago, the way that software was developed is you had a clear, let's say, development department and you had a clear operations department. And the development department was basically developing, and they were throwing stuff over the fence to the operations department, and they were basically responsible for running stuff in production. All right. Now, the problem with that is that the developers weren't really realizing how stuff was running in production, right? So there was these weird errors happening, and they didn't really understood how to create a scalable application, for example. So, and I'm painting the picture a little bit black and white, but just bear with me. And about, let's say, 10 years ago, there was a new, let's say, movement that came in, which was called DevOps. And with the DevOps movement, you basically said, okay, developers and operations kind of have to work closer together. In other words, in operations teams, there needs to be development representation, and in development teams, there have to be operational representation. In other words, developers have to be way more responsible for how code runs in production. And they need to create tools in order to monitor these things in production, etc., so that they're much more aware of how stuff is actually used, right? So you couldn't get away anymore with saying it's running on my machine, right? But it actually needs to run in production. However, the problem with DevOps, what it created, was a little bit of a wild grown of all sorts of different tools. So it was basically creating a lack of standardization, right? And DevOps had really good initiatives, right? Like responsibility, and we'll talk about that in regards to Developer Hub as well. But DevOps also created its own problem. So in about 3 years ago, you got this whole new notion of platform engineering. Now, what is platform engineering? It still embraces that notion of DevOps, right? That a developer is more responsible for how stuff runs in production. But with platform engineering, it was driving more standardization. So you basically have one team that delivers a specific platform, and then you have application teams. They basically build all their applications. In TIBCO's case, obviously integration applications or complex event applications or BPM applications. But you drive standardization through providing a platform. Now, as part of that platform, a developer portal was an essential piece to make this happen, to drive on that standardization, right? And that in the TIBCO platform is where the TIBCO Developer Hub comes in. And I'm going to talk about it in more detail later and what all the items are. But that's basically why we have a developer portal in the TIBCO platform. And then you can use the developer portal to basically start building TIBCO specific applications. All right. Now, let me also touch a little bit on the control tower. So the control tower allows for, let's say, the classic stack to be available inside of the control plane. Like I said earlier, it basically works with a drop-in binary, and then you don't have to change anything on your classic stack. Everything can basically be running as is, and it becomes visible inside of the TIBCO control plane. And what's also an advantage is that a TIBCO classical administrator for BW5 always manages one domain, but with the control plane, you can basically bring in multiple domains, so you can manage multiple domains at one time. So here you see a short video of that. So you see the applications that are running on premise. So basically the BW5 application. So you have a specific BW5 data plane. And then here you can see, okay, what is the usage? What is the memory of the specific machine? And you can also see the details of an application. And remember, this information is all basically being bottled up by Hawk. So this is all basically being visible from the actual running applications. And here you can see the how many processes were created, what the process definitions are, and the logs of the BW5 applications. All right, end-to-end observability. I think I already spoke about this. So this will basically create deeper insight in your application, and you can follow messages end-to-end through. Okay, let me do a quick demo of the TIBCO platform. So here I am logged into a control plane, and I basically have my overview. So I have my number of data planes running. I also see in which regions the data planes are running. And if you want, you can register a new data plane. You see the capabilities, so the TIBCO products that are deployed. And here you see of apps that are running. So let's say the cloud-enabled apps and the lists of those applications. What is also interesting to know is that at the right top, you will basically see a region. So the control plane itself also runs in 2 regions, in Ireland and Oregon. But if you look at data planes, they run in all specific types of regions. So Oregon, Ireland, yeah, Oregon, Ireland is basically where we have these data planes, but you can deploy them in any kind of region that you want. Here you see one in Australia, for example. All right, the next thing I want to highlight is that it also comes with user management. So you can connect this to your own IDP, or you can use TIBCO accounts like you could do with TCI. You can add the users in here, and you can also specify permissions. So you can get quite fine-grained permissions. So you can, for example, say, okay, who can manage specific data planes? And you can also specify that per data plane. So if I go to my own name and I click on it, you basically see, okay, I can go to all these specific data planes, but if I assign a permission, you can really per data plane say what these permissions are that you should have. So it's quite fine-grained deployments. All right, so if I go to a specific data plane, so let me take this one, for example, then I basically see on this data plane, I see all the various capabilities that are installed. And what's also nice, you also see that upgrades are available. So like I said in the beginning, the gist of it is that we don't really want to do upgrades for you like we do in a complete SaaS solution, but we do want to notify you that there is an upgrade available, and by the click of a button, you can basically apply this upgrade. But I can imagine that you, for example, you have a development data plane, a test data plane, you want to try out the upgrade there, and eventually you want to decide a moment on let's say a Saturday or Friday night where you want to do the deployment in, let's say, low usage hours. And then you can do that upgrade. All right, so if we look at the, so for example, if I go to BWCE here, you will see that you have these things called app builds. So you can create a specific application build. You can also see the software, so the versions of BWCE and the versions of all the plugins that you want to use, and additional supplements like drivers. By the way, what's also very cool is you also have the API documentation. So here you can basically see, okay, I want to call the APIs to do deployments and builds on BWCE. And then if I go here and I go to a specific running application, then, so let's see if there is one running. Oh, they're all stopped. Well, if I go to a specific application, I can basically see the application. I can see the endpoints. I could see the monitoring, so how many messages are going through this, and I can see the logs of this application when it's running. All right, so that was a quick overview of the TIBCO control plane and the integration applications inside it. I do want to mention though that we did discuss let's say a next session where we do a little bit more of a deep dive into the TIBCO platform itself. So this session is really about the TIBCO Developer Hub. But in order to understand the TIBCO Developer Hub, I just wanted to give you a very quick overview of the TIBCO platform. All right, so what is the TIBCO Developer Hub? I've already explained it to you, like it's, let's say, developer portal as part of the TIBCO platform. But it's based on an open source technology called Backstage.io, which is part of the CNCF Foundation, like Kubernetes is. And it's kind of, and I'm going to say this word again, a single pane of glass, but in this case, it's for the developers. So it's a single pane of glass where developers can inflows, Spotify reports, APIs, etc. They can also find the documentation of all these various components, and they can find the owners of these components. And they can basically create new assets based on templates. And I'll talk about that in great more detail later. And I'll also do a demo of that. And you can manage and view build pipelines. And in the future, it will also link to running components into the control plane. Now, how are we distributing the TIBCO Developer Hub? We're basically distributing it in two different ways. So you will have a developer hub image, which is basically the developer hub base image. And you can go through a provisioning wizard, and I'll show you that in a minute. And that will allow you to basically do a deployment to the data plane. And the second way we are distributing the developer hub is we have completely open sourced it. So today you can actually go to this. Let me quickly show you that. So today you can actually find the TIBCO developer hub on this page, TIBCO software, TIBCO developer hub, and you can find all the source code for the developer hub, and you can also start running it yourself. Now, why have we done that? And I'll explain that in a minute. But basically, the developer hub uses a framework called Backstage. And for Backstage, there are a lot of different plugins available. There's plugins for all sorts of technology. And in order to install a plugin, you basically have to take the code, make changes to it, and deploy that to a data plane. And I'll show you that in great detail later. But to install the basic version of the developer hub, it's actually pretty straightforward. So you say provision a capability, like for example, BusinessWorks or Flogo. And this will bring you to a wizard where you just have to answer a number of questions. But in essence, you just have to say next, next, finish. You can provide this custom configuration, but it's completely optional, and you can change that configuration at a later stage without a problem. Then it will basically run a Helm chart, and that Helm chart will install the developer hub on your data plane. And then from there, you can reach your developer hub. So installing a developer hub is that easy. All right. Now, what can you do with the developer hub? You can find resources, and I'll talk about that in more detail later. It's very important that every component in the developer hub always has an owner assigned, and this is really coming out of the DevOps world. So if you're looking for a specific integration flow and you have a question about it and you can't find the answer in the documentation, you can always see who's responsible for it. And that could be an entire department, but that could also be a specific person. You can list the APIs inside of a developer hub. You can see the system architectural views, and I'm really enthusiastic about these system architectural views because with this, you can basically paint the bigger picture. You can show how the entire architecture of the system looks like. And you can use these code templates. And I've told you many times, but I'm going to show you that in more detail later. All right, so this is the homepage of the Developer Hub. On the homepage, you see various cards, right, for systems, APIs, components, etc. And you can favorite some of these. So that basically, let's say you have 50 components inside of your Developer Hub. You can star some of them, and that's a personal setting, and they will always come to the top of the list. So as a developer, you can basically set your own favorites. Okay, now let's have a quick overview, and I'm going to show you that in the demo later as well. When you log into the Developer Hub, you can basically see the architecture of a specific system. So you can see what components are all in that system. You can look at that architecture from left or right, or you can take the diagram. You can look at, for example, a specific API. You can see the definition of that API. And you can also see the documentation of a specific component. Then it's very easy to find stuff in the Developer Hub. So every component can be tagged, which by the way is also true for the control plane. And then you can basically search on these tags. You can also search on other things. But with the tags, it's very nice to basically find stuff in the Developer Hub. So if you tag it nicely. Like I mentioned before, it's very important that, and when you run a template, you always have to specify an owner. So every component always has an owner. And then you can also see the groups and the people, and they can basically see, okay, I'm the owner of these and these components. Then the documentation. is basically generated based on MD files living next to the code. So then you can basically, and that MD file, so that markdown files gets translated to HTML, and then you basically display this documentation. Now, what I also would like to mention is that we are currently working on a proof of concept with a TIBCO partner that can basically generate the documentation out of this. So what they do is they use BusinessWorks 5, BWCE, BW6, iProcess, AMX, BPM, business events, and EMS as basically the sources. And from these sources, they can generate documentation. So you actually see the processes. And then you can generate. And what's also nice about that is that, so they can generate it now to MD files. But what's also nice about it, if you make code changes and you commit these MD files, you can actually see what's the difference between the MD files. So you can also see how the code basically evolves. Watch this space. I think we're very soon going to create a webinar specifically on this topic. All right. Now, what's also nice is that inside of the Developer Hub, you can list APIs. And in the TIBCO Cloud, you currently today have the API modeler. And towards the end of the year, you will see this API modeler come to the TIBCO platform. So this is basically a place where you can define and build your APIs when you use an API first approach. Then from the API modeler, you can publish these APIs in a source repository. So for example, GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or any source repository. And from there, you can basically visualize them inside of the Developer Hub. What I would like to say is that the Developer Hub is basically a catalog with all sorts of different APIs. And TIBCO also has API management. Now, remember, the Developer Hub is basically a portal, right? So it brings everything together. It's not there to replace any of the systems. And the way you should see this in regard to, let's say, API management or Meshery is that, let's say you have a restaurant and you have people sitting in the restaurant having dinner. They are getting menus. You should really see these menus as your Meshery or your API manager, right? So these are your partners, your customers, how they want to consume your APIs. Now, the Developer Hub is more, let's say, in the kitchen, where you have the various recipes on how the food needs to be prepared, right? So the Developer Hub is a much more inward-focused portal for your own TIBCO developers or your partner developers, etc. And they can basically see, let's say, the recipes of all the different foods. So this is a much more detailed system architectural design and how you can use the APIs, etc. All right. Now let's talk a little bit in detail about this system architectural view. And I'm really enthusiastic about this. And why? Because I think TIBCO traditionally has been very good at visualizing software. So most of our products work in a similar way, where you basically have a, let's say, canvas, and you drag activities on that canvas, and then you configure these activities. I mean, our integration products work like this, our BPM products work like this, our complex event products work like this. It's kind of like you create bunches of code, have a short time to market. You can go to production quickly. Because every time you drag an activity on that canvas, you kind of configure a whole bunch of tested code. However, what we were lacking up until now is basically that bigger picture. So how do all these different integration flows or BPM flows or everything come together? And with this system architectural view, you as an architect can really design the system. And as a developer, you can really understand that the component that you're developing, what the place of that component is in the bigger picture. And you can also do stuff like impact analysis. So if I want to change this component, right? I want to change the interface of a specific API. which are all the components that are impacted by this. And this is really what this system architectural view provides you. And I think that's really cool to have as an addition to your, let's say, IT infrastructure. All right, now let's talk about templates. I mentioned this a few times already, so let's dive into it. And I'm really enthusiastic about the templates. And some of you might have already used BusinessWorks 5 templates or BWCE templates. And I think the notion of templates inside of the Developer Hub is, let's say, a superset of your BW5 templates or BWCE templates. So you can actually leverage off templates that you've already created for BW5 or BWCE or template, let's say, patterns or code that you have created in the past. You can all mold this into this way of working because it's a really open way that these templates are set up. Now let's dive a little bit into the details. So what you can do with these templates, or these templates are basically set up out of 3 different parts. So the first part is the template sources. So a template itself is always defined in a source repository. So let's say, for example, a GitHub repository. And you can also have multiple templates inside of a repository. But for sake of simplicity, let's say one template is in one source repository. Now that in the template, you define a questionnaire, which is basically a bunch of questions that you want to ask to the user that is going to use that template, that's going to run that template. And then based on the answers that the user gives, you can run these actions. And there's a whole bunch of actions you can choose from. But the basic actions are like, okay, take the code from the template, do some name value replacements, for example, register a new component into the Developer Hub, and create a new GitHub repository, for example. Now here you have a template editor. So inside of the Developer Hub, you can actually go and create these specific forms. And what's really nice is that this uses a standard, and that standard is called JSON REST schema form. For some of you who know it, it's a really nice standard because it allows you to create very complex forms with these YAML definitions. So you can do things like creating arrays, asking for multiple inputs. You can do things like if then else statements. If the user selects this in a drop-down, show a radio button or show a text input field. And I'll actually show you an example of that in the demo later. Then here we have the template actions, and you can, let's say, list or select the actions you want to use inside of your templates. But what's also really, really cool is you can define your own custom actions. And when I started realizing this is when the sky opened up, the sun started shining, the birds started tweeting, because I was like, wow, now everything is possible. Because what this allows is you can basically ask the user for a number of questions. He gives you the answers, and then you can run these actions. And if the answers that the user gives in the questionnaire are already enough to create running code, you can directly deploy this to a production environment, for example, or to a dev environment or test environment. And I'll show you I'll show you an example of that later, where we use Jenkins and GitHub actions to achieve this. Now, what's also cool is, and I'll show this in the demo, we have created an integration for running the templates from our IDEs. So for BWCE, you have Business Studio. If you download the latest, or I think also the second latest version of BWCE, you will see in the left bottom a Developer Hub tab. From there, you can configure to connect to a Developer Hub, and you can basically list the available templates. And directly from there, you can run a template if you want to. We have done exactly the same for Flogo. So when you are building a Flogo application in Visual Studio Code, and I'll talk about this extension in great more detail in the next half hour. And in Visual Studio Code, you can basically list out the Flogo templates. And then from here, you can also run a template directly. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about plugins. So again, the TIBCO Developer Hub is based on an open source framework called Backstage. And Backstage really has this plugin architecture. And there are a lot of plugins available. So every organization is different, right? And every organization uses different, let's say, development tools. Some organizations use Jenkins, some organizations use Lambda functions, some organizations use Azure pipelines. There is plugins for ChatGPT, etc. The last time I counted, and there are plugins added every day, there were about 170 plus plugins. Now, remember, when you install the plain Developer Hub, you basically get a base version where you only have the base plugins. But you can also, let's say, clone or fork our open source repository, run the Developer Hub locally, and then you can also start installing plugins. Now, installing plugins basically means you need to do an npm or a yarn command to add a plugin to the code. And then it might be that you have to update the UI, it's a React UI, to say, okay, I want this tab to be provided by that plugin. So you're really editing the Developer Hub. But what we have now done in version 1.1, so this came out in February, is we allow for you to install these custom plugins on the TIBCO platform. Now, how does it work? You take the open source repository, you install the plugin, and you do a build. And a build basically means you create a new container image out of the Developer Hub, and you publish that to a custom image provider. So for example, a Docker Hub or ECS or ACS or wherever container image, maybe you have one locally in your organization. You basically put your image there. And then here you have your data plane. And then from the control plane, you can select an installed Developer Hub, so one that's already running. And then you say, I want to install a custom version. And all you need to provide is basically the custom container image URL, so how the data plane can retrieve that new image. And then you can basically install it. It might be that you have to provide some additional authentication provided to authentication information to get to that custom image. But then you can basically install that custom image into a data plane. All right, now let's do a few demos. So the first demo I want to do is I just want to show you an overview of the Developer Hub. So a little bit of a tour of the system. And then in the second demo, I want to run a specific template where we create a new BWCE application based on patterns that we select. So we want to create a new app and we're running some patterns. So basically from the form, we create a completely new application. And this sounds very simple, but there's actually quite a lot of stuff going on behind the covers. And I want to go into detail here because I think this is really cool. And we actually got the help of the BWCE team to make this possible. So what do you have? You have your developer machine. Then you have the TIBCO platform. You have a source repository and you have a build server. Then on the developer machine, you have Business Studio and you have a browser. And then on the platform, you basically have the Developer Hub running. In GitHub, you have a repository. And on the Jenkins server, you have a tool installed called the BW Design utility. Some of you might know this utility. This is basically a CLI for BusinessWorks development. So this is kind of a headless version of Eclipse. And this allows you to make code changes. So to basically create your integration flows programmatically, right? Now, what happens is you have the process patterns stored in the repository. You have the BWCE pattern template. Then you have the Developer Hub integration with the Business Studio. So from here, we basically select, okay, we want to run that specific template. Then this will bring us to the browser where we open up the form. There we answer the questions. Based on the answer, the template result is stored in the repository. And by the way, and that's also the nice thing about these templates, you can decide how this template executes, right? So you could decide to create an entire new repository, but not all organizations allow the developers to just go ahead and create all sorts of repositories, right? Sometimes there is a request procedure in order to do that. So what happens in this case is there is a pull request created inside of a current repository. So we're basically creating a new branch, and there we're putting the template result. Then that gets picked up by the build server. And from there, the process patterns are kind of getting weaved into the application. And then eventually we get that result into a Business Studio. All right. Then the third demo I want to show you is where we basically go even one step further. And I have a video of this demo, so I'll show you the video later. But in the third demo, I basically want to go all the way to directly deploying an application. So in this case, you never use Business Studio or an IDE or something like that. You basically answer the questions, in this case, exposing a database table as a service. You deploy that application, or the build server basically creates an IR file. Then that is picked up by GitHub Actions, which uses a Docker file to create a container image and eventually deploys that to a data plane. So let me dive into the demos. So here I am on the control plane. And in the control plane, I basically see the developer hubs that I have. So I've installed a number of developer hubs, and I'm going to open up this specific developer hub. And then here I have that homepage, right? And I can see already the ones that I start are basically my own APIs or components that I work with. So I can, for example, open up this car system, and I can see the diagram of this application or this system. But I can also see the graph, and then I can basically start drilling down into that graph. I can start changing the direction here. Basically create like a view that I like, you know, like maybe I'm not interested in the APIs, maybe I'm not interested in the domains. And then you can basically start creating a view of the application. All right. Then also inside of the system, you have a number of components and APIs. So here I can go to the API detail page. And then from here, I can actually directly get the details of the API. Now, if an API is implemented, I mean, when you create something in the developer hub, it doesn't always mean that it's implemented, right? You start designing it, and then you start implementing component by component. But if it's implemented, you could actually start invoking the API. So try out the API from here as well. And what's also always nice, you can always go to the sources. So every component basically has a link to the source repository. Actually, everything that you see in the developer hub, basically the single point of truth is the sources, which are the source code. So there is a little database running behind the developer hub inside of the data plane, but you could destroy this database, and then you can bring up the developer hub. And if you import the components in a little bit of a clever way, you basically get the entire developer hub rebuilt. So you don't have to worry about this database. The one single source of truth is basically the source code with the definitions. All right, so if I go to that system, what I can also see is basically the tech doc. So basically the documentation of this specific system. And you can also start searching through this. So BWCE. And then here I've found a specific component, but I could also say view full results. And then I can start doing some, let's say, more detailed search, the stuff that I'm interested in. Also, next to basically this homepage that shows you all this system, you also have this catalog page. And there you can basically see all the different types. So you have APIs, components, domains, let's say groups, and you also have your templates. Then there's also a separate page, basically lists out all the existing APIs. And then we have a separate page that lists out all the docs. So this kind of concludes the first demo. So now I actually want to show you the second demo, where we use the BWC pattern application generator to create a new BW application. Now I kicked off this, so I basically chose it. But what I can also do is I can also go to Business Studio, and I can basically see the developer hub from here. So from here, I can basically say I want to run the template, and it will directly open the template here. So let's give this a name. Let's say demo. And I'll give it a description. And now I can select a number of flows. So I'll basically say I want demo flow 1, and then per flow, I can basically say what are the different patterns that I want to use. So here, demo flow 2, and then I'll basically per flow say, okay, I want to create a specific pattern for this flow. So we have a request reply, multiple message server, multiple message client, and then we'll basically say next. And I did say a few times already, it's very important to always select an owner for the developer hub. So here we say, okay, the integration department is the owner, but this could also be a specific person. Then we get one review step, and then we're basically going to run this specific template. So what happened, and we can actually, if we want, we could also show the logs, so the detailed logs, but we don't have to do that. And what happened is a few things. So first of all, in the repository, so we have a new repository in this BWC pattern template, or as I say new repository, we have a new branch created called partner demo integration. And we have a new component inside of the developer hub. And here we have a number of tabs. So here, for example, on the CI/CD tab, you can directly see what the Jenkins, in this case, project looks like. And then from here, you could also open up the Jenkins job, and you basically see the output. So this is now really that step number 5, I think it was, that is basically weaving in those patterns. Okay, so while this is running, I actually want to show you something. Oh yeah, so first of all, you can also open up the Jenkins job from here as well, so directly after the build. And that's really defined in how you set up the template. Now, if I go to catalog, and if I go to template, you basically see the pattern application generator, and you can see the source of the template. And here you see the actual definition of the template. So here is how a specific template is defined. And then inside here, you have this skeleton. And here, for example, you have this index.md file. So you have the documentation for values.name, values.description. Now, what happens in that newly created component, and what's also nice is you can always see, okay, what was the last run? And then from here, we can open up the thing in catalog. We can open up these values. So it really uses the, let's say, answers to the question that the user gives in order to create these applications. All right, so what happened now is that this pattern weaving is done, right? So the build server has done his job. So here we see this job is now completed. That means we can do two things. So if we go to the sources of this application, we'll basically see these pull requests. And we have now everything inside of a branch. We could work with that branch and say, okay, we're happy with it, and then we merge it, but we can also directly just merge the pull requests. So now I'm merging the pull request, and I'm going back to Eclipse, and I'm going to this Git, let's say, view. And if I do a pull, what you will see happening is that you basically, inside of this template output folder, you get this partner demo integration folder. So from here, and what I can basically do is I can say import existing projects into Workspace. And I can basically copy these projects into Workspace. And now you will see that I have all these processes that we selected inside of our, let's say, questionnaire, right? So all those questions that we answered in that questionnaire. So we had demo flow 1, 2, and 3 with all these different patterns. So if you go here, then let me quickly show you. So here we have this task list, so the last one that we run. And what's very cool, you can actually say start over, so you can go back to that form. So here you have demo flow 1, core patterns that was created. Now this is super powerful because remember, Developer Hub was to drive standardization, right? So as an enterprise architect, you can start defining all sorts of patterns, right? This is how we do request reply. We have to add in some logging. We have to add in some tracing, for example. And you can start defining all these patterns. And a developer, in order to start developing, just has to answer these questions in this questionnaire, and then he basically can get going. Now, there's a few cool tricks, and I could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to show you very quickly. There's a few cool tricks that you can do here. So you have this edit template form, which allow you to basically start editing these templates. So you can do things like more steps, etc. You can make changes. And what you can also do from here is you can basically see a list. Oh, sorry, not this list. The list of installed actions. So here you have a whole bunch of actions that come out of the ground or out of the box, out of the ground. And so here, for example, publish to Bitbucket, publish to GitHub, etc. And then eventually you can also create your own template, your own action. So for example, this trigger Jenkins job action. And remember, just to finalize how this is working. So if I show you the template and I show you the sources of this specific template, you see that the template is defined in a YAML file. That YAML file basically has those 3 components that I was talking about in the template, right? So it has a source repository in which is checked in. This specifies the actual template metadata. You will recognize this because it's very similar to how Kubernetes files are defined. Here you basically define the form. So this is the form definition, the questions you want to ask to the user. And then you have all these steps: fetch, create the pull request, register, and trigger Jenkins job. So if you go back to the to how the template run, so to that list of actions, task list here, you basically see those steps: PW skeleton, create the pull request, register, and trigger the Jenkins job. So for every template, you can kind of create these little green things yourself, these actions. So what needs to be done? Now, why is this so powerful? I'm going to actually show you that in the next demo, of which I have a video. Let me just continue. And just to repeat what I'm showing here is what I've done now is that we ask questions to the user, and then we're opening up Business Studio to make a mapping or do the development or whatever. But what if the questions to the user are actually sufficient to create fully running code, right? So here we basically trigger a template. For example, we have a Postgres to SAP application, where we say, okay, we have a Postgres database and we know what the database table is, we know what the URL is, and we just want to publish that information into SAP, right? We don't need to do any additional development in order to get that done. So what happens here is we have the CI/CD pipeline, in this case running on Jenkins, which then creates an IR file. That IR file eventually gets pushed back into the repository. And then from the repository, a GitHub action gets triggered that will basically start building the container. And then the container gets picked up and using the Maven plugin. So we have added another task to the Maven plugin to basically do a deployment to the TIBCO platform, right? So you can imagine that for all sorts of small integration applications, you could do this deployment directly. All right, now with that, I've said that, let me move on because I see I have another 20 minutes. And I quickly want to talk about the VS Code extension for Flogo. So Flogo is kind of the next generation integration framework. And the reason being, it's completely redesigned. So Flogo, instead of Java, uses Go underneath. Now, and the nice thing about that is that Go is much more lightweight, especially if you put that into containers into the cloud, because it's not depending on a JVM, right? Which can be quite bulky to put in a container. Actually, if you ask me, it's a little bit of an obsolete layer to have a JVM in a container. And what's also nice is that Flogo or Go basically kind of compiles an executable out of the integration flows that it means. That means it only imports those things that need to go in there. So, and Java uses a class path. And in a class path, you basically get imported all the jar files and everything that's on the class path. So if you have a Flogo application with, let's say, a number of palettes, etc., and you compile that application, it will only import those things that are required instead of all the code for all the stuff that's on all the palettes, right? So fundamentally, Flogo is much more lightweight. So, and then on top of that, it also uses REST and JSON under the covers. So no more XML. And that also makes it, let's say, a lot more lightweight and more modern. Then it also supports all sorts of modern API technologies like GraphQL, async APIs. It's really created for cloud integration. And like I said, it is very lightweight, right? It runs, you can create executables that are smaller than 10 megs, both in the size on disk and both on in memory. So for very, let's say, lightweight integration use cases, I think Flogo is the way to go. Now, having said that, there's obviously also use cases where XML, SOAP, WSDLs, EDI, that type of, let's say, mature technology is still very important, then definitely BWCE and BusinessWorks is the way to go. But if you have new projects and you have very lightweight integration requirements, do consider having a look at Flogo. Now, Flogo was developed on TCI and can still be developed on TCI today, which basically means it has a full online development environment. But what we have done as well is we've created a Visual Studio Code extension for Flogo. Now, what does it allow you to do? You can basically create your Flogo applications offline. So you don't need to be logged into a SaaS solution in order to start building your applications. You actually have a full-fledged IDE, right? Like you have for BusinessWorks with Business Studio, which is based on Eclipse. Now you can do this with Flogo based on Visual Studio Code. Now, why did we choose Visual Studio Code? First of all, it's by far the most popular IDE at the moment. Everybody is using Visual Studio Code. And the reason everybody is using Visual Studio Code, again, it's a very extendable framework. So there is many plugins available on Visual Studio Code. And what I see happening a lot nowadays is there is a big focus on AI and generative AI when it comes to developer experience. You see all these, let's say, co-pilots pop out everywhere in order to generate code for developers, right? You can generate a piece of Java code, you can regenerate a piece of HTML code, and all of these extensions also become available inside of Visual Studio Code. So I think it's a very good place to be in for Flogo development that basically sets us up for the future. All right. Now, having said that, what can you do with the extension? First of all, you can just build your applications and test them locally. Runtimes. We have 3 types of runtimes at the moment. We got the local runtime, we got the TCI runtime, so the TIBCO Cloud SaaS solution runtime, and we got the new platform runtime, so a data plane. In the future, we are also considering adding a Kubernetes runtime, so you can directly deploy into a Kubernetes. Then you can also build the Flogo binaries. You can, for example, run tests locally and deploy to Docker and Kubernetes using some scripts. And you can also build pipelines. All right, now what does it mean that you have an extension? If you open up an extension in Visual Studio Code, you actually see what that extension all contributes to to Visual Studio Code. Now, in this case, we add a number of commands, but we also defining our own language. And what that means, I'll talk to you in a minute. It adds a number of views, and you have a custom editor, which is basically the editor that you're used to from TCI. Now, these panels that we've added is that if you have installed the extension, you will see in the File Explorer panel, you'll basically see this Flogo app. And that kind of corresponds with the app that you have opened. And from there, you can run actions, like, for example, build, run, deploy, test, etc. Whatever actions are available for the application that you have open. Then you also have these remote panels where you have a runtime explorer. And in that runtime explorer, you can basically add your runtimes. So your local runtime, TCI runtime, and data plane runtimes. And you also have a panel where you have a favorite remote app. So you can add apps that you are currently working on, let's say your work bench. Then also, and I really like this about Visual Studio Code, is everything works with commands. So we have all these Flogo commands that allow you to do things like building or doing a test or running a specific action or opening an app or downloading the sources of an app. And what's cool is that you can actually create hotkeys for these commands. So if you run a specific action a lot, you can basically create a hotkey. It's almost like gaming, right? And making yourself more efficient when you're gaming. So if you're developing, you can say, okay, I want to build and run a test, and I'll just press Control T or something to execute that, right? So that's really nice about these commands. I did already say that we applied a custom language. So Flogo is basically defined in JSON. So the underlying, let's say, language of the application itself is JSON. But if your file extension is .flogo or .flogo.json, it will automatically open up the application in the Flogo editor, right? And from there, you can always see the JSON sources as well if you want to. Now, if you look closer at that editor, you'll basically see the similar things that you saw in TCI as well. So you have your application properties. For the ones on you that are more familiar with BusinessWorks World, basically your global variables that you can set. You have your connectors with your connection configuration. So you can set, okay, I want to connect to these various systems. I want to configure these connectors and maybe set some properties. And last but not least, you can also see your flows, right? So your integration flows that you have for a Flogo application. Now, what's really cool about Flogo as well, as the same with BusinessWorks, it's extendable, right? So you can extend Flogo in a number of ways. You can create your own, let's say, custom functions. You can create your own type of activities, and you can create your own connectors if you want, so your own connections. And these extensions you basically build by providing a piece of Go code. And in the case of an activity, you also have to provide a piece of, I think it's TypeScript or Angular, some piece of UI in order to display that in the editor. You can load these extensions. So basically you develop that Go code and you can put that into a local folder. So you can provide your extensions there and then you can basically start using them. By the way, Flogo is also completely open source framework. So you can also find a lot of these extensions developed by the community online. Then you have the runtime manager. In the runtime manager, you basically set up and edit the runtimes that you are connecting to. And then you have the various actions. So you have an action for an app that you have open, let's say a local app, and you have these remote apps. So for example, if you make them favorite, you can also run actions. For example, download the file so you can start editing them locally. And then here you have these favorite apps. So for every app, it's basically like your own preference, right? The same apply to the developer hub. You have that homepage, you can star stuff. And that stuff is the stuff that you are working on. And then once you're done working on it, or you after a few weeks, you're not touching it so often anymore, you can just remove it from favorite apps. Now, I want to show you two specific scenarios inside of Visual Studio Code. One is in the first demo, I basically want to create an Flogo application from scratch. So just a simple Hello World application, and then basically run and call that application. And in the second demo, and this really shows the power of local development, I'm going to run a little script where you basically can do continuous development. So you make a change, and while you're making that change, you directly see the test result. So let me dive into the demo. So here I have Visual Studio Code. And I basically, if I go to my extensions, here you see the Flogo extension for Visual Studio Code. By the way, if you want to get your hands on that extension, there is in the control plane a download page, and in the download page, you basically have the Flogo extension for Visual Studio Code. So here is where you can get it from. All right, and then here, if we open up a Flogo application, you see that Flogo panel. And here you have this Flogo, let's say, separate sidebar item where you have the Runtime Explorer. And then so here you can list out all the apps that exist. And then here you have your favorite apps at the bottom. And by the way, if no app is selected, then this little Flogo app thing will basically say, create a new Flogo app. So that's what we will do now. And I'm going to call this Hello World. Okay, so now I get a new application with a new flow. I can open up that flow, and we're just going to add an activity, right? So first I'm going to log the incoming message. Then I'm basically going to say reply to trigger. So we want to do a simple Hello World application. And then we need a trigger. So we're basically going to say, okay, receive an HTTP message. And then we need a path. So we say hello, and then name, for example. And then we want a response schema. So here we say message. And what's nice is that you can basically define the response schema by just providing a sample JSON message. So now we actually get that message, and it's basically coming into this thing here. So let me just make this a little bit bigger so I got more space. I can actually close this as well. And I can also make this full screen. So here we now see that on the path parameters, we basically get this name. So here we also have all the functions, similar as what you are used to in BusinessWorks. And I can basically concatenate two strings. So for example, I say hello. And then I'm going to map this guy here. And I'm actually going to copy this because I also want to use this in the reply trigger. Normally I would use a mapping, but let's not do that. All right, so here we have the reply object. In the reply object, we basically have the data. And then if I open up this again, now I basically have this application. If I do validate, it should all be fine. All right, so I have my local runtime selected. So what I can do is I can basically say, run this application, or I could say build and run this application. But what happens, it will basically create an executable for that application, and it will start that executable. So now we basically see this Hello World application in this bin folder. And then eventually we will see this application starting up. and then it will ask if it can connect to the port. So now we have our little hello world application running here. Hello application. Now what I can do is I can actually call that application. So I'm just going to do this curl command. Let's see, could not resolve. No, but it's fine, right? Because it says hello Hugo. So I think this is fine. Let me just see, maybe I made a mistake here. Yeah. So now it actually says hello Hugo, right? Because I provided Hugo, but I could also provide somewhere else. Hello. And then it says like this. All right, so that concludes my first demo, where we basically created an application from scratch. And this was already also possible in TCI, etc. But now I want to show you what the advantages of local development. So I'm going to close this application. And I'm going to open here. And I'm going to run a specific script, which is this script. And I'm basically using NodeMon for this, but you can also use something else. And what happened, it kind of started the application. And then we basically get the result inside of this result application. See, did I made a mistake? Let's see. Oh, yes. Yeah, I made a mistake because it is not in this folder. It's in the bin folder. So let me just correct that and then run this guy like this. Okay, so now the application is started and I have this result called hello world, right? Because I'm calling this with hello world. Now, if I move this to another view.
In a few minutes, so we will have some time for questions.
Yeah, no worries. So let me just conclude this demo very, very quickly, and then I'll leave some time for questions. All right, so if I now go into this trigger, and I basically go into the message here, and I change this to brave new, for example, then you will basically see if I press save here, that the change gets applied, and I directly get the result in this new file. So this opens up all sorts of possibilities for basically doing online or real-time development. And with that, I would like to conclude the demo and leave some place for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo. We have one question regarding the developer hub. Does it also include managing access permissions to REST and SOAP services? You mentioned it, but not completely with the permission.
Sorry, does it?
Does it also include managing?
Sorry, I did not get it.
Sorry? You hear me?
Does it also, let me repeat the question, see if I got it clearly. You said, does it also manages access permissions for APIs?
Does it also include managing access permissions to REST and SOAP services?
Yeah, okay. That's a good question. So there's two answers for that. First of all, there is a plugin for the developer hub called the RBAC plugin, which allows you to do very detailed policies on authorization. And I always confuse authentication and authorization. Those words are too similar. But authentication is basically you log in, right? You're that user. And authentication is you can do these things, or authorization is you can do these things. You see, I mix it up. But this RBAC basically allows you to say, okay, that user has the rights to see that API, for example, or in that domain. Now, remember, having said that, so that's the first answer to this question. Remember, having said that, the developer hub is really for managing development assets, right? So this is you're working on development. This is not so much for runtimes, right? So if you have an API that is running in production, right? And you want to say only that group of developers can use that API, right? They need an API key, etc. That is not the purpose of the developer hub. For that, you need an API management solution like API management or formerly known as Mashery. I hope that that answers the question.
Any more questions? יש עוד שאלות?
Yeah, I have three. I hope to do it quickly. You show us a very impressive demo on creating APIs using the templates in the TIBCO Developer Hub. Can we do it without the console? I mean, by using only REST APIs that managing the Developer Hub?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, the Developer Hub comes with APIs as well. So you can run a template by invoking an API. That's actually just backstage functionality. Now, I have to say here that when you are running a template, you need the form inputs, right? So you need the answers from the user, right? And in order to invoke that API, you need to provide that as a JSON, right? So, and you do not have an API that shows you the form as nicely, that asks you the questions, etc. So typically you would say, okay, I'm gonna run this form. I basically detect what the JSON file is, and then I run the API like that. We are also working on a CLI, and that CLI will basically have a task to say run a template. But that CLI command, for example, will always take as an input the JSON file that basically contains the answers that the user gives in order to run the template. So yes, but it's not as flexible as the UI, right? Where you can just like, you know, fill in that form, do drop-down boxes, radio buttons, and all sorts of stuff.
Thank you. Now it's almost the nearest path to creating automatically APIs or generating APIs. What about AI involving on this creation?
Yeah, we have that on the roadmap towards the end of the year. We want to do something with, let's call it a TIBCO pilot. So where you can have a co-pilot that helps you, you know, creating APIs, creating flows, etc. But we are very much on initial stages there, and we're basically looking at what makes the most sense. And if you guys interested, we are really interested in working with partners and customers on this to validate what could actually. So if you want, contact me. My email is very simple. It's hp@cloud.com. So contact me, and then we can have a separate discussion on that, because there is a lot of stuff that we can do, and there's a lot of stuff that we're already doing. But we're really trying to figure out what makes sense here, right? From what will really increase the developers' productivity in this regard.
Very good.
So you're looking for a customer to do a pilot with?
Sorry?
Are you looking for a customer to do a pilot on this?
Yeah, but first, just initial discussion, just to see what the requirements are here.
Okay, good to know.
Okay, last quick question. You show us the Flogo, and you said that it can be deployed and creating flows on-prem. What about the connectors? Can they are installed on-prem, like connector to Salesforce and other stuff?
You mean Flogo on-prem as running it in a because
you showed that the ID can be on-prem, right?
Yes, yeah. So you run a Flogo application locally, and when you build the application, the connectors basically get put into the executable. So you run them from there as well. So it imports them when you build the application. And when you deploy a Flogo application in the platform, you basically provide all the connectors that you want available for that specific platform or data plane, and the versions of the connectors that you want.
Okay.
I also see a question in the chat, which is very interesting. What is the vision about BW6? Will BW be expired in the nearest future? I can assure you that BW5 will not expire in the near future. Actually, the new TIBCO platform fully embraces BW5. So you can show your BW5 applications in the platform. But we do obviously want to make it easier for our customers to migrate from BW5 to BW6, right? Because that's where all the new features are, right? Like in BW6, you also have AI type mappings or AI type changing the settings in the runtime so it runs optimally. So yeah, we do want to encourage our customers to move from BW5 to BW6, but don't worry, BW5 is still supported and will still be supported for a while.
That's very important.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Yes, I want to ask a question, please. I have a question about the documentation method, the documentation application you showed earlier.
Yeah,
You said it can run on BW5, BW6, and also business events.
Yeah.
What, it takes the code and builds the automatic documentation of their connections and stuff like that? How does it work exactly?
It just looks at the source code and it generates documentation out of that. This can be in PDF format, HTML format, or MD format.
And if I have like a system that has also BW5 and B business events components, can it also show all the connections between all the components in the same system? Like I give it the...
So. Yeah, I think so, but it's a little bit of a detailed question. So maybe we should take it offline and see if we can do a separate proof concept with this, for example.
Okay, we'll arrange it.
Thank you.
Great. So any more questions? So thank you, everyone. Hugo, it was amazing. Everyone wrote me during the presentation that it was very, very insightful and learned a lot. So we hope to have another webinar soon, and we will keep you posted. And hello, Talks. Now I see you. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Very much.
Thank you. Aya, can we send us the recording, please?
All right. Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Hugo, for a wonderful presentation. It was lovely. I think all the presentation, all the ones that we hear things a bit differently now, how TIBCO goes to the future. So thanks very much.
That's good to know. Thank you for the feedback.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.